Today we're talking about the world's most popular non-legal drug, caffeine. As of 2023, an estimated 2.25 billion cups of coffee are consumed worldwide every single day. Now, the modern world has become very fast-paced. Sometimes people working in certain professions have to pull late, sleepless nights working unsociable hours, and yes, I'm talking about doctors. So you may notice that as the day progresses, you begin to feel more tired, for reasons I'm going to talk about later on. So in order to stay awake, people tend to turn to caffeine. In order to stay alert during the afternoon or the late evening, consuming coffee has become a very popular beverage for people. And yeah, sure, the occasional coffee is fine. I indulge in it myself, but making it something regular can be a bit problematic for you. And so we're going to discuss the themes of caffeine tolerance, dependence, addiction, and withdrawal in this video, and how you can potentially overcome these problems. So just a quick disclaimer before the video starts. I want to make it very clear that I am not a healthcare professional. I'm only a medical student, and none of the information shared in this video is the actual medical advice. But the themes being discussed in this video, be assured, have been heavily researched on, and so everything I'll talk about in this video is very evidentiary and also anecdotal when it needs to be, because I will talk about my own personal experience with withdrawal. But if you have any concerns whatsoever, queries or problems with regards to your health and caffeine consumption, please consult a doctor. Okay, so how does caffeine work to keep you awake? I think this is an important thing to talk about because it puts things more into context. And well, science is very cool and interesting. If you want to skip straight to the section where we talk about exactly why caffeine isn't good for you and the potential alternatives, you can click this timestamp below. Our bodies need a constant supply of energy to keep us going. And this is something we get through eating food. When we consume an energy-rich diet in carbohydrates, our body creates a molecule called ATP. Now, ATP, its molecular structure should be somewhere on the screen. In order for you to perform tasks, ATP breaks down, and in the process of doing so, it liberates adenosine. ATP's full form is adenosine triphosphate, and the adenosine part, with the A standing for adenosine, is released. And so let's say that this is our adenosine. Adenosine binds to adenosine receptors. We're going to give adenosine a smiley face just for representation, but this isn't actually what it looks like. So adenosine would bind to adenosine receptors because they have a similar mechanical structure, and when this binding takes place, a variety of proteins that inhibit neurons are released. And this suppression of nerve cell activity is what causes the feeling of drowsiness and makes people feel sleepy. So essentially, just to make it simple, you eat more food, more ATP breaks down, adenosine is released, adenosine makes you sleepy, and as you eat more throughout the day, you get sleepier because of this process. Now let's talk about caffeine. This was adenosine, and this was an adenosine receptor. And this is caffeine. Caffeine, we're gonna give it a weird face. So caffeine is what we call an adenosine receptor antagonist. And the word antagonist, in very simple terms, essentially means that it performs the opposite task of adenosine. And so if you think about this, if adenosine makes you sleepy, caffeine will make you awake. And when you consume caffeine, it binds to these adenosine receptors, derailing the process of slowing your neurons down by blocking adenosine receptors. And this works because adenosine and caffeine have similar mechanical structures, so caffeine binds to this structure a lot more easily than adenosine does. And so adenosine inhibits your neurons, and caffeine inhibits the inhibitor, and it stimulates you. And as a result, you feel less sleepy and more energetic. Essentially, what caffeine does is it stimulates the central nervous system, causing increased alertness even if we don't have enough sleep. So now we know how caffeine works, we've gotten that out of the way. So now here's the case for why you might want to stop having coffee. Now, although temporarily, caffeine can have its benefits. There are very many real benefits to caffeine. For example, it can start or to a certain extent speed up your metabolism for the day, but it can also raise your heart rate and blood pressure. It can also cause increased urination. This is because caffeine is a diuretic. It can cause diarrhea and contribute to insomnia or anxiety. But what I really want to talk about is adaptation. Your brain can adapt to the regular consumption of caffeine. Although this process isn't extremely well understood, if your adenosine receptors are constantly clogged by caffeine, your body will just manufacture extra ones. Now think about this, right? Sleep is a critical and vital process for your body. Your body wants you to sleep, and when you consume more caffeine, you're unable to do so. So your body will recognize that there is competition to adenosine, so it's just going to manufacture more adenosine receptors so that adenosine can bind to these receptors and make you sleepy and make you fall asleep. It's a very intelligent system, and this is why adenosine can still do its job by telling the body when to power down. This is why you may feel the need to consume more and more caffeine to feel alert. And this is known as upregulation of adenosine receptors. In response to chronic caffeine intake, when you're consuming caffeine once every single day, maybe even twice or thrice, the body may upregulate the number of adenosine receptors. This is a sort of compensatory mechanism which could be the body's way of maintaining and balancing and counteracting the effects of caffeine. And as we discussed earlier, more adenosine receptors mean that a higher amount of caffeine may be needed to block a sufficient proportion of them and produce the same stimulant effect. And the next adaptation we're going to talk about are neurotransmitter adaptations. Chronic exposure to caffeine may lead to changes in the release and sensitivity to other neurotransmitters such as dopamine and norepinephrine. And these two neurotransmitters are involved in the brain's reward and arousal pathways. These adaptations may contribute to the development of tolerance, where higher doses of caffeine are required to achieve the same desired effects. To make it sound more simpler, essentially when you consume caffeine, you feel a rush of happiness. In order to experience that same amount of happiness, because your body becomes used to caffeine, it adapts to caffeine, you need to consume greater amounts of caffeine. And needing to consume greater amounts of caffeine to feel happy all the time, it's not great. It has its side effects as well that we're going to talk about very soon. And all of these adaptations that I've just listed are greatly affected by intrinsic predispositions such as your genetics. So that's just something to bear in mind. Caffeine, adenosine receptors, these are all factors that vary greatly from person to person. I know people who consume copious amounts of coffee but they still feel tired. Caffeine has absolutely no effect. If I consume caffeine, I will be very, very, very awake. Further, having to increase caffeine does mean that you will feel the need to, well, take more caffeine, as we discussed previously. And taking more caffeine isn't necessarily good for you because that causes insomnia, feeling jittery, increased heart rate due to increased blood pressure, and digestive problems as well. And the unfortunate thing about caffeine is that just like other drugs, trying to quit caffeine comes with unpleasant side effects that we call withdrawal. And withdrawal is very problematic. I've been through it myself. With plenty of receptors and no competition, adenosine could work over time. So let's say that you haven't had coffee for a single day. Just one day you haven't had caffeine, so these receptors will start to become empty because there is no caffeine. And slowly the caffeine starts to just go. And this means that adenosine works over time. So adenosine takes up all of these extra receptors that were created. Remember, due to chronic caffeine intake, your body has to create more adenosine receptors, so more adenosine molecules bind to these receptors, and the effect is that you feel a lot more tired. And this could cause headaches, tiredness, depressed moods, and we know the effects of these things are so real. A lot of us consume coffee on a regular basis, and if you don't take your coffee one day, you're gonna feel a very strong rush of fatigue, extreme drowsiness. A lot of us have been there. And so it becomes a vicious cycle. You have to take more caffeine due to biochemical adaptations, and you find it challenging to overcome caffeine dependency because you're physically dependent on it. Or else you'll find yourself having nasty withdrawal symptoms. But the good thing about caffeine withdrawal is that overall, the duration of caffeine withdrawal symptoms can be relatively short-lived. And compared to other drugs, of course, please don't do drugs, the withdrawal effects aren't that severe. And most people begin to feel better within a week, and as little to about 3 to 4 days. And this is because just in a few days, the extra adenosine receptors that your body created, they start to disappear. And so your body will start to readjust and you will feel normal again. After overcoming withdrawal, individuals may experience increased energy, improved sleep, and a more stable mood as the body adjusts to lower or caffeine-free levels. So real quick, you can again skip this section if you don't care, but I just want to talk about my experience with withdrawal symptoms. So essentially during sixth form, when I was 16, 17 years old, I was preparing for university, I was preparing for getting into medical school, I was studying for my A-levels, it was very hectic. I was of course working very hard every single day. I was thinking of ways as to how I could improve productivity, so I turned to drinking cold coffee. So the first few times I had it, I absolutely loved it, it was great, I felt energized, I felt alert, but then after a few weeks things got very bad. I think my receptors got used to caffeine, so they created more, and I started feeling so tired. I did not increase the amount of caffeine I used to take, but I increased the frequency at which I took it. So I started taking cold coffee twice a day, and I felt so tired all the time. I'd come back from school, I'd sleep for about 2 to 3 hours, I'd still be tired. It was awful. It was a really bad few months. So then after that I did some digging, I learned more about caffeine consumption and withdrawal, and so I gave up coffee entirely. Yes, I do have the occasional coffee. Withdrawal symptoms were nasty, they were not fun. I was really tired, I was in bed all day, I didn't feel good, it was really rough. It lasted for about a few days, but then I was better and I felt amazing. And this brings us to the alternatives. And what is the alternative? Well, there's two things you can do. The first one is reduce your caffeine doses. Don't put too much coffee in your cup, or alternatively try green tea, or just regular tea. I drink green tea once or even twice a day, and if I don't for a few days, I do not feel withdrawal, or I feel very less withdrawal. This is because green tea contains very small amounts of caffeine. Green tea has numerous health benefits. This is something Dr. Mike talks about a lot. I'll link his video somewhere in the description because I loved it. Since I watched this video, I've been having it pretty much every day. But the caffeine content in green tea is so much smaller than coffee's, which means lower risks of biochemical adaptations that cause withdrawal and dependency. And the small amounts of caffeine that exist in tea, that's enough to keep you stimulated enough. So here's number 2. Just sleep and organize yourself better. I understand this is very hard for a lot of people because life is hard. Sometimes you're required to work long hours, work long shifts, I understand. However, at the very least for a student, and this is something I could certainly improve on myself, is becoming more organized and improving time management. If you're already caffeine dependent, perhaps quit it entirely. Yes, you'll have withdrawal symptoms for some days, but it's gonna be over and you'll feel back to normal in no time, I promise. Now, of course, withdrawal in rare cases I imagine could be very serious, in which case I'd advise you to seek medical guidance, support and advice. But when you do overcome caffeine dependency, sleep at a certain specific time and wake up at a certain specific time again, and aim for about 8 hours of sleep every night, and you're gonna feel energized and happy to start the day without feeling the need to consume caffeine to stimulate your nervous system. Are you a student and want help with studying techniques? Well, if so, on this channel I've made a whole playlist about study tips, which I'll keep on adding to and expanding, so check that out. Until then, thank you so much for staying until the end, it means a lot to me. Good luck, take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Subscribe.